In 1996, a woman by the name of Maxine Clark took a friend's daughter shopping for a stuffed animal. She asked her afterwards if she had fun, and the girl responded, "Well, I did, but I would have more fun if I were able to make the stuffed animal myself." Kids are never satisfied. Well, that gave Maxine Clark a new idea, a brilliant idea. And a year later, in 1997, she opened the very first Build-A-Bear workshop. Build-A-Bear Workshop has become very popular throughout the world. It has over 400 plus locations and has sold millions and millions of stuffed animals. And the idea is the kid gets to come in and be involved in the process of making that stuffed animal themselves. They pick out what kind of stuffed animal, and then they're given a heart, a sparkly heart or a plaid heart that they get to put inside the animal. And they begin to be involved in the process of stuffing the animal as well. How firm do you want it? How soft do you want the teddy bear? Then also you get to dress it as well. Build-A-Bear Workshop embodies the kind of culture we live in today, where we are not just consumers, but we also customize what we consume as well. We customize our coffee orders, our sandwiches, our playlists, our social media, our news feeds, or even our entertainment is all about customization. We want the world built around what we want. And that's great, that's awesome, but that is very dangerous when it comes to our faith. And I'm afraid that many people approach Jesus the same way a child approaches a bear in Build-A-Bear Workshop, where we want Jesus the way that we want him. We want him to fit our preferences, our circumstances. We want him to be firm enough to support us and firm enough to comfort us, but not so firm that he confronts us, that he calls us to a higher life. And that's a great way to stuff a bear, but that is not the way that Jesus works. Jesus is not something that you assemble according to your preferences. He is the Son of God. He is the Messiah. And the call to follow him is not to shape him into what you want him to be, but to allow him to reshape you, reshape everything about you, everything in your life, everything that you think about. He wants to reshape you. And that begins with humility. That begins by admitting the fact that maybe you have Jesus wrong, by admitting the fact that maybe you were blind to who he is. This morning we approach Mark chapter 8, and this is something that we've been working towards since September in Mark. This is a climactic point in Mark's gospel. It is the fulcrum point of Mark. He has been building up to this point here in Mark chapter 8 to make a certain point about Jesus, to show us who he is and what he is all about. Join me in Mark chapter 8. We'll start in verse 22. We start out with a very weird story about a blind man. And they came to Bethsaida, him and the disciples, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And Jesus took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" It's kind of weird, kind of odd thing. I thought about bringing my brother up here for a moment, giving you a live demonstration of what that actually looked like, but it's kind of disgusting. So he says, "Do you see anything?" Verse 24. And he looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Very odd. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." What is going on here? Jesus is brought with a blind man, and Jesus takes the blind man out of the village, away from the people, by himself, him and the man. And Jesus spits on his hands, touches his eyes. He says, "Do you see?" And the man says, "Kinda. I see people, but they look like trees walking." And Jesus touches him again, and then he sees clearly. What is this about? Is Jesus losing his messianic touch? What is going on here? In a way, this is about our prayer life as well. Sometimes Jesus answers our prayers in moments like that. Sometimes it comes in stages. But this is so much deeper than that. Just in these 5 verses, seeing and sight is referred to somewhere between 9 and 11 times. This is a story about seeing Jesus. Because what happens next is the disciples have the same encounter that this blind man does. They see Jesus for the very first time, who he is, but they don't understand the cross. They don't understand that he has to suffer. And so they see Jesus, but he looks like a tree walking. They see, but not so clearly. And this is all about sight, seeing Jesus for who he is. It's really a parable within a miracle. I believe wholeheartedly this happened, but this happened more so to teach his disciples more than anything else. And just like Jesus took the blind man out of the village, now he's going to take his disciples out of Israel into Caesarea Philippi and try to open their eyes. Let's keep reading. Verse 27. And Jesus went on with the disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" Jesus takes his disciples to a place called Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is a place of idolatry. It is a pagan place. Think of a strip mall for idolatry. You could literally go and choose which god you wanted to worship. At one point, the god Pan was worshipped by throwing babies and sacrificing them into water. At this time, in Jesus' time, Caesar is being worshipped at Caesarea Philippi. Hint the name Caesarea Philippi, named after Caesar Philip. His worship is for Caesar. Why does Jesus choose this place? Of all places, to show who he is, to show that he is the king, he is the Messiah, he is the Son of God. Jesus chooses this place because he's trying to say that he is the king, not just a king. He is the Son of God, not just a Son of God. See, Jesus is the reality to which every other God and king is the parody. There is no one else but him. And he chooses this place to reveal himself to his disciples. And he asks them, who do people say that I am? Verse 28. Well, some say that you're John the Baptist. Some say Elijah. Some say Jeremiah. Some say one of the prophets of old. What is going on here? You see, everybody has ideas of who Jesus is. Everybody is trying to figure him out. And just like in the first century, they had an idea of who Jesus is, the same is today. People have all sorts of ideas of who he is. Many believe that he is the embodiment of the God of the Old Testament, the creator in flesh. Some see him as nothing more than just a great teacher who had great teachings. Some see him as nothing more than just a therapist, there to affirm their feelings. Some people see him as nothing more than just prosperity and a means to an end to a greater life. Some see him as just a good luck charm that they wear around themselves. Some see them as nothing more as just something you participate on a Sunday morning. There are a lot of ideas about who Jesus is. And now Jesus gets to a deeper question. Okay, that's great. But, verse 29, who do you say that I am? Who do you say that I am? See, this is the most important question that can be answered for the disciples and for us as well. It is a fact that Jesus existed. It is a fact that he is a historical figure. And the question is, who do you say that he is? Who do you say that he is? He existed for a fact. Is he just another historical figure that made an influence on this world? Or is he the king, the Son of God, the one who demands total allegiance from your life? Who is he? A.W. Tozer says, we tend by a secret law of the soul to move toward our mental image of God. What you believe about Jesus ends up shaping who you are. Peter answers him, verse 29. He asks him, who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Christ. That word Christ can also be translated as Messiah. A Messiah in the Old Testament just meant an anointed one or an anointed king. The kings in the Old Testament were anointed. They were messiahs. But over time, as the prophets began to prophesy, that phrase Messiah began to point towards the king. The king from 2 Samuel chapter 7, who would sit on the throne and reign forever. And Peter is confessing that you are that king. You are the one we have been waiting for. For the very first time, he gets it. For the very first time, his disciples understand that. Remember the context of Mark. Mark chapter 1, verse 1. You, the reader, know who Jesus is right away. But everybody in the story is still trying to figure it out. Still trying to figure out who he is. And finally, in chapter 8, we get to that point. Okay, now you're beginning to see. But the thing with Peter is he sees Jesus, but it looks like a tree walking. Let's keep reading verse 31. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. Notice that phrase. He began to teach them. In other words, this is a new teaching that Jesus is introducing them. They get it now. Now he has to add something as well. He says, I began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things. That phrase, Son of Man, is a phrase that is used in Ezekiel and Daniel, and it speaks of a representative who delivers God's people from suffering. Daniel chapter 7 talks about the Son of Man sitting on the throne and ruling and having dominion in a kingdom. And Jesus is now teaching them that this Son of Man, this figure, has to suffer. He has to die. He has to be crucified. That was so countercultural to what the disciples were thinking at this moment. Again, they wanted that Messiah, that anointed king, to deliver them, to sit on the throne and crucify their enemies, not be crucified by his enemies. The Old Testament talked about this idea of a suffering servant, that someone would come in and bear the sins of Israel, bringing her healing and restoration and redemption. There was a suffering servant and a Messiah, and the people were waiting for these two figures to come, but they never thought that these two would be one person. That the Messiah and the suffering servant would come together. That the Messiah, the king, has to suffer and die. And Jesus begins to teach them these things. 3 times in Mark chapter 8, 9, and 10, Jesus is going to have a teaching on his suffering, on him dying. And the disciples do not take it very well. Because it's not what they're thinking. It's not who they think that Jesus is supposed to be. And that's why, verse 32, Peter takes him aside and begins to rebuke him. I do not advise that you rebuke Jesus. Verse 33, but turning and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Peter's idea of this Messiah was not what Jesus said he was. And now Peter rebukes him, and Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. That is on the top of the list that you'd love to hear the Son of God say to you. What a thought. Peter's distortion of Jesus is based on 3 things that I believe. First is this. His distortion of who Jesus is a misreading of Scripture. He's picking and choosing between the Torah and the prophets, those prophecies about the king having glory and honor, but ignoring those prophecies that he also must suffer and die. Picking and choosing his misreading of the Scripture, but not only that, selfishness of his own heart's ambition. If Jesus is the king, what does that make Peter? That would make Peter his right-hand man, a place in power. So it's also Peter being selfish and wanting something to gain out of that as well. But it's also a third thing, the worldview that he's been born into. The way that he sees the world, the way that the people expected this king. And all of those 3 things come into Peter's vision of who Jesus is. That it's blurry. He sees a tree walking that's not really Jesus. And get this. Peter's vision was so off of Jesus that it was satanic. And if Peter can be wrong, you and I can be wrong as well. The disciples who are there following Jesus, they're with him every minute of the day. If they can be wrong about who Jesus is, don't you think you and I can be wrong about who he is? It's easy to get off about who we think Jesus is. And this is the greatest danger of the church today. There is a danger to make up our own Jesus, who looks more like us than who he really is. And the call here is to recognize your blindness, recognize the fact that you see, but you do not see clearly. Spiritual maturity begins with humility, the willingness to admit that there may be places where our understanding of Jesus is incomplete or distorted. Admit your blindness, admit where you're wrong. And this is why it is crucial to spend time in the scriptures every day, to spend time with Jesus every day. And when you come to a place where Jesus confronts you, where Jesus calls you out, where you don't like what Jesus says, you don't like what Jesus does, the call is not to change that and shape that around you. The call is to shape your life around him. Let him confront you. Let him change you. And that's exactly the call that he turns around and gives to his disciples. Notice verse 34. And calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me. Notice the first part of that phrase, if anyone would come after me. The proper place for a disciple is behind the teacher, after the teacher. What did Peter just do? Peter just stepped out in front of the teacher, trying to get the teacher to do what he wanted him to do. The proper place of following Jesus is behind Jesus. Sometimes we want Jesus to follow us around, but the call is to follow him and be behind him. It says, if you're going to follow me, if anyone come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. 3 things Jesus calls. First, he says, deny yourself. This is not denying yourself certain things. It is denying all of yourself. It is a surrender of all your self-determination. A refusal to let me sit on the throne of my own life. You see, discipleship to Jesus is not just a hobby. Jesus wants to be the control center of your life. He wants every aspect of your life surrendered to him. It says, deny yourself, take up your cross. See, the cross in the first century was not a piece of jewelry or a logo outside. It was something shameful. In fact, we don't really know exactly what the cross looked like. We have that image of that lowercase t. That's mainly what we think it looked like. But the cross was so shameful, so horrendous to look at, that it didn't show up in art until the 6th or 7th century AD. It could have very well looked like a capital T. It could have looked like one singular post with Jesus' hands up here, his feet down there. It could have looked like an X. The cross was a horrendous sight because it meant death. It meant punishment. That is how Rome punished its criminals. If you thought you could rebel against the Roman Empire, well, they made a spectacle of you. And they made you look horrible on that cross. It was offensive to look at. And Jesus is calling us to take up our cross, to die that horrendous death. Paul will say in Galatians 5 that those who have followed Jesus have crucified the desires of the flesh. Again, I am no longer the control center of my life. It is Jesus. Then he says, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Luke chapter 6, verse 40, Jesus says, a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, once he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. The idea of following Jesus is that you ultimately get to be like him. That aim of your life should be, I want to be like Jesus. I want to do as he did. I want to say as he said. I want to be who he is. See, Jesus is not calling us to admire the cross from a distance. He's calling us to follow the path that he has laid out for us. Let's finish the rest of the text, verse 35. For whoever would save their life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and yet forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of the Father with the holy angels. I love Jesus because he just states reality. He just states the fact of what it is. Yes, there is a cost to following Jesus. Yes, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow him. Yes, that comes at a cost, but you also have to count the cost of not following Jesus as well. There is a cost of non-discipleship. Yes, you will lose a lot when you follow Jesus, but you will also lose so much more if you don't follow him. Count the cost of following him, but also count the cost of not following him. That's what Jesus is getting at. Whoever would save their life will lose it. Life is only found in me. Life is only found when you give up yourself. When you give up trying to find life your own way, and you come and you find it in me and in myself, that is the only way. That is what Jesus is teaching here. That victory first comes through defeat. That triumph first comes through suffering and death. And in order to be triumphant, you must first lose yourself. Because what does it gain a man if he gains the whole world yet forfeits his soul, the inner being of who he is? Jesus is calling us to allow him to be the control center of our lives, to find our every being, to find our every self in him. The call this morning is to embrace the cross as a way of life, not just as a symbol. In our culture, the cross has largely become a symbol, something worn around your neck or displayed on a wall or out in the streets. But when Jesus calls us to take up our cross, he's not inviting us to admire that symbol. He's calling us to a way of life that is marked by surrender. It means denying self. It means putting Christ's will above our comfort and following him even when the path is difficult, even when it requires death. And in order to follow Jesus, you must first go to the cross. I take you back to where we were in the middle of Mark 8, of Peter standing in the way of the cross, saying, "No, Jesus, I do not want you to go to the cross." And what does Jesus say to him? "Get behind me, Satan." You see, when you deny self and you pick up the cross, you become more like Jesus. But when you deny the cross and you pick up yourself, you become more like Satan. And there is no in between. There is no middle ground. It's either or. Embrace the cross as a way of life, not just a symbol. When you walk into a Build-A-Bear workshop, the whole experience is built around that idea that you get to choose. The kid gets to choose what kind of stuffed animal, how firm that stuffed animal is, what kind of heart it has, what kind of clothes it's going to have. And it's a great experience for a kid in the Build-A-Bear workshop. But I highly advise against that when it comes to Jesus. It works fine when you're building a stuffed animal, but it does not work when it comes to him. Jesus is not something we assemble according to our taste. He is a Messiah. He is not a Messiah we customize so that he fits comfortably into the life that we want him to live. You see, Mark chapter 8 confronts that reality. Peter had a version of the Messiah in his mind, powerful, victorious, glorious, but that Messiah wasn't who Jesus came to be. He became to be somebody who suffered, somebody who died, who became triumphant by first losing in a shameful way. And his words, "Get behind me, Satan." In other words, when we reject that path of the cross, we're not thinking the thoughts of God. We're thinking the thoughts of men. And we're trying to shape Jesus into something more comfortable instead of allowing him to shape us. So the call of this passage is simple but serious. And admit where your vision of Jesus is blurry, and embrace the cross as a reality of life, not just something to admire. Jesus does not call us to admire him for a distance. He calls us to surrender. And that is the invitation this morning, to surrender. To surrender every thought, every being, everything in your life to him. For some of us, that starts at the waters of baptism, where we surrender to him and we say, "I surrender my life. I quit trying to figure out things on my own, and I die to myself, and I'm raised into this new life, the life of the cross, and I am raised into a life following you." If we can help you with that, if we can help you in your surrender of daily life, Luke will add that word that you have to deny self and take up your cross daily. And it's not just a one-time thing, it's an everyday thing. If we can help you with either of that, we invite you to come as we stand and as we sing.